So for this video, I'm just going to be going into some analysis for the track Over the Mountain, which is one of my favorite tracks that Randy Rhoads and Bob Daisley ever composed. In terms of hard rock or metal, if you consider this metal, it's one of my favorite tracks of all time. If I had to choose one word to describe this track, I would call it thunderous. It's just so well written. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that are going on in the harmony. I'm also going to be talking about some of the things in the guitar playing, because the guitar playing is actually pretty interesting in this song. So let's get started. When most people think of Randy Rhoads, they think of a great lead guitar player. Which is all true. He was a fantastic guitar player. But I don't think he gets enough credit as a composer. So the first thing to know is that most of the songs that he wrote with Ozzy Osbourne used some form of the natural minor scale, also known as the Aeolian mode. Most of Randy's compositions, they included some form of the natural minor scale. Almost all of them. There's only a few songs that he wrote where there was not the natural minor scale. He was very tasteful at knowing what to include in the songs that he composed with Ozzy Osbourne. And Over the Mountain is a perfect example of that. What is the difference between natural minor and other forms of the minor scale? Well, natural is really just its natural state, which means this is the pure minor scale. The key difference, though, with natural minor is that it has to have a flat 7th and a flat 6th scale degree. It's not natural minor if it does not have these scale degrees, because that's what gives it its flavor. Because Over the Mountain is in the key of G minor, let's look at what creates a G minor scale. The G natural minor scale contains the notes G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, and G. Now, classical composers like Beethoven, they did not use the natural minor scale in the same ways that Randy Rhoads used it. The reason is because natural minor contains a flat 7th scale degree, which resolves up to the root or the 1, and this was forbidden in most classical periods. In fact, when I studied at the university, one of my favorite college professors, he used to call this a 7-up. So if we handed in our homework assignment and made this mistake, he would ask us to bring him a can of 7-up. Of course, it was a joke. The point here being is that classical composers were not allowed to have the flat 7th resolve upward. What they would do is that they would raise the 7th so that it would be a proper leading tone. So it would be a half step higher. The point here is that a flat 7th resolving to a 1 was not considered acceptable through much of music history. In fact, it's really only been in the 20th century and onwards that it has become acceptable to have a 7-up. In Over the Mountain, there are a lot of 7-ups throughout the song. In fact, the use of the modes by contemporary composers today is much more common than using a harmonic or melodic minor scale. One of the best examples of the natural minor scale is the track Over the Mountain. This song is in the key of G minor. If you look at the transcription songbook, it says it's in G sharp. That is not really true because the guitar is tuned down a half step. So in other words, the guitar is tuned from E natural to E flat. Now, Ozzy's vocal line here is very clearly outlining the key of G minor because it begins with the root or the 1, which is the G, and then it briefly heads downward to the F natural, which is the flat 7th. And I want to emphasize the importance of that because that indicates natural minor. And then it heads upwards to the B flat, which is the flat 3rd, indicating some kind of minor scale, and then back to the original key center, which is G. The only other thing I'll say about the vocal melody is that there is a little more syncopation in the melody than what might be obvious. It might not sound very syncopated, but there's quite a few notes that are on the offbeat in this melody. But the melody is just one part of what makes this song great. The other part of this equation is Randy Rhoads' counter melody, which is at the end of each vocal phrase. Once Ozzy finishes his line, Randy simply plays this arpeggio-like melody here. It starts on the third, which is the B flat, then the next note is the D, followed by the G. This very clearly outlines a G minor chord, but then this melodic idea continues up. Because the harmony below in the quarter notes is an E flat chord, this D to E flat is actually a leading tone to the 1. And then this final C note is actually a perfect fifth in the rhythm guitar below. It's those last three notes of D, E flat, and C. That's what really leaves an impression on the listener's mind. Without this counter melody, the song would just not be the same. It's this counterpoint here that really sticks in your head, and this is known as a hook in a song. This hook just grabs your ear. It's very memorable, and it's a big part of the reason why this song is so successful. Now, I will point out that some people have transcribed this as going from D to E flat and then up to F. Sometimes he does end up on the high F, but most of the time I hear the melody going down to the C. This counter melody or hook, it just complements Ozzy's vocal lines so well. It's very catchy, and I think most people remember this part of the song the easiest. Now, Randy was not the first composer to use this motive, this da-da-da. In fact, you can find this motive all over classical music, including many pieces in the 20th century. One example that comes to my mind is Igor Stravinsky's Symphony in C. You will find this motive all over Stravinsky's Symphony in C. And this is just one example of countless, endless examples of pieces that use this motive. The other thing I really like about this song is the harmony that's going on in the lower guitar and the bass line. This part of the song is known as the verse in the song structure. You can hear the 16th notes being repeated over and over again in the guitar part. But once we get to the end of each phrase, if you listen, you can hear the bass line goes down to a low E flat, and then it goes to the F, and then it ends back on the G. This also highlights the G natural minor scale. It's going from flat 6 to flat 7 to 1. This progression would have not have been acceptable back in the classical period of Beethoven, but in today's present time, this is actually a very common harmonic chord progression. But having the bass line do this is a nice touch because harmonically it fits really well with the counter melody that Randy's playing. Now there's really not a lot to say about the chorus because it's really just two chords mainly. It's just an E flat major chord followed by an F major chord, and then it repeats with Ozzy doing a catchy vocal melody above it. But this once again makes use of the flat 6th and the flat 7th chords in the G natural minor scale. Some people might be wondering, why did Randy Rhoads tune down a half step with this song? Because G is actually a key on the guitar that uses a lot of the open strings. So some people might be wondering, why did he choose to tune down a half step and then use the key of G minor? Well, I don't know for sure, but I believe that it may have been because he wanted to play this one part that starts right before he starts playing the 16th notes. What Randy did is that he's playing these open E flat notes here, meaning that there's a low E flat and then there's a high E flat an octave above, and then it quickly switches to an A flat and an E flat, so it's an A flat open chord, there is no third, and then it immediately goes to G after that. What this A flat chord is that it is the flat 2 in the scale degree. Now, A flat is not in the key of G minor in the scale, but it is okay to use chords that are outside of the scale. In this case, he's using something that's very common, which is just a flat 2 chord. And then the flat 2 chord just resolves to the 1 chord. I think he wanted to be able to play these open chords of E flat and A flat. I think that's the reason why he chose to tune down, because if he did not tune down, it would be impossible to play these chords like this. There's just no way on the guitar to play these exact chords if you're tuned in standard tuning. This leads us to the next part, which is the bridge. And in this section, we've modulated to C minor, meaning that the key has changed to C minor temporarily. This bridge is fairly simple because it just mainly alternates between a C minor chord and a B flat major chord. But once again, the B flat keeps resolving up to the C minor, and that is another 7 up because B flat is the flat 7th chord in the key of C minor. At the end of the bridge is where something interesting happens because it ends on some kind of A flat chord, but then the next chord that follows is a D minor chord, which starts the interlude. That harmonic change from A flat to D minor, that's a tritone shift. Sometimes changing the harmony by a tritone shift can be really effective at surprising your listeners and keeping the song more fresh. Now, D minor is the 5 chord in the key of G minor, and it's very, very common for brief modulations or key changes to go to the 5 chord. This motive in the guitar repeats 4 times before eventually resolving back to the 1 chord, which is G minor. And then the first guitar solo begins. Now the guitar solo is very interesting. It starts off with the G, and then it plays an octave above with the high G, and the next note that follows is a C sharp. And C sharp is not in the key of G minor. But what it does is that it adds a nice dissonance to this part because it creates a tritone. There's a tritone between G and C sharp, and it also creates a subtle dissonance because it clashes against the D, which is part of the G minor chord that is in the background. Then after the C sharp, it just goes to the C, and then B flat, and then F, before finally returning to the key center of G. The guitar solo then repeats this, but the second time it ends on a different note, which is a B flat. Now this next part of the guitar solo is probably my favorite part. What happens is the harmony changes here. We're not in G minor right now. It changes to C minor. And this is really like a scale run. It is a guitar solo, but it actually is a lot like a scale because all of these notes are in the C minor scale. C minor contains the notes C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat, and then C. All of those notes are in this part of the guitar solo. But the one part of this that stands out the most, in my opinion, is the very beginning because he plays this arpeggio. It's simply just a C minor arpeggio, but then it goes up to this high note, I believe this part pays tribute to composers like J.S. Bach. I don't know for sure that's what Randy had in mind, but to my ears, it definitely resembles Bach. And then it starts descending in these 16th notes in this repeated pattern. What's kind of funny to me is that this part is actually easier to play on the piano than it is on the guitar. And I'm not even a real pianist. And it's easier for me to play this part on a keyboard than it is on the guitar. But I can still play it on the guitar reasonably well. This is actually a very good exercise for any guitarist who's learning because this really gets your fingers used to playing in a natural minor scale. One other thing that Randy was pretty famous for was double tracking or overdubbing all of his guitar parts. He double tracked his rhythm guitars and also his lead guitars. And in the solo, the first part of the solo for Over the Mountain, he does double track the solo, but he does it in parallel octaves, meaning that one of the guitars is at the bottom octave and the other is at the top. This is actually a very common scoring method that composers use when they're writing for string orchestra because they will usually have the melody doubled in parallel octaves in the violins or the violas or the cellos, whatever it happens to be. Now, what follows in this middle part of the guitar solo is really more like a cadenza. It's really more composed for the effects and of course also to show off a bit. So in other words, it's not tied to the key of G minor, and in fact, it's not really clear if there is a key for parts of the solo. And it's very common for a cadenza to do that. A cadenza does not need to stick to the original key or even have an obvious key. This part here is really just him using the whammy bar for effects. But even so, there are some parts that are very clearly still tied to a key, which is this part right here. And then there's this last chromatic run towards the end. It's actually not that difficult to play, but it is fun to play on the guitar. The solo begins to end with this slow bend, but it ends with this pick scrape. Somehow he makes this almost sound like a tiger or some kind of big cat. It just has that kind of roar to it. I can never seem to get my own pick scrapes to sound like this. There is a brief guitar solo at the very end of the song, but it once again follows that same pattern we had before with the C minor scale, except this time the solo is in the key of G minor. Now, I admit that I do feel a little depressed every time I listen to Diary of a Madman, simply because Randy Rhoads had barely begun to show the world what he was capable of. I mean, he really just gave us a brief glimpse of what he could do. And it's just so unfortunate that we never got to see more of what he could do because he was taken so early from us. But on the other hand, at least he gave us these songs that he did that we can forever enjoy. In order to perform your best as a musician or a composer, you need to be as well rested and healthy as possible. And that's where today's sponsor for this video comes in, which is Ojjayi Meditation. Ojjayi is the only meditation method that I've ever stuck with, and I've tried a lot of them over the years. You see, the truth is that most people crave deep rest above everything else, whether they realize it or not. How many people do you know are always complaining that they don't have enough energy or that they feel tired and that sleep is not enough? Ojjayi delivers deep rest on a level that I had never experienced before. And deep rest is so important because everything works on the foundation of how well rested you are. The more rested you are, the more you can do in your daily activity. So go to ojjayi.com today and sign up for your first 9 free videos. I am composer Britt Andrew Burns. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon on the next video. Bye for now.